Only one group dares to challenge this intergalactic threat, the Superfriends.
The others are taken prisoner while Flash and Queen Freya are caught in an icy avalanche.
Before capes went cinematic and budgets went sky high, 70s TV did villains with glue, grit, and pure nightmare fuel. If you watched on a wood-paneled zenith with a cereal bowl on your lap, these faces lived rent-free in your head. By the end, you'll know how a Venus probe became TV's scariest killer, why Bigfoot was secretly bionic, and the robot army that fooled an entire generation. Let's roll back the dial to a time when special effects meant creativity, not computers, and when the scariest villains were the ones that made you question everything you thought you knew about safety, identity, and what was lurking in the shadows. 7. Black Manta, Challenge of the Superfriends, 1978.
Versus the Legion of Doom. This is the challenge.
The Legion of Doom had plenty of colorful crooks, but Black Manta was different. That blank insectoid mask and that deep electronic voice made him feel less like a guy in a costume, and more like a creature that had crawled up from the deepest ocean trenches where sunlight never reached. While Lex Luthor schemed and Bizarro bumbled, Black Manta hunted. He didn't announce his presence with dramatic speeches or elaborate death traps. He simply appeared from the depths like a nightmare made of metal and malice, his red eyes glowing in the darkness of the ocean floor. That voice, processed through some kind of electronic filter that stripped away every trace of humanity, was what really got under viewers' skin. It didn't sound like a person trying to sound scary. It sounded like something that had never been human in the first place, something that had learned to speak through underwater ambushes and shadow strikes. His underwater domain was a masterpiece of aquatic horror. Submarines slipping out of shadow like mechanical sharks. That Hall of Doom, the Legion's domed HQ rising from a swamp like some kind of technological tumor. Black Manta turned the ocean from humanity's final frontier into its most dangerous enemy. What made Black Manta truly terrifying was how he moved through his element. In the water, he wasn't just another supervillain, he was an apex predator in his natural habitat. Every encounter with Aquaman felt less like a superhero battle and more like a nature documentary about what happens when humans venture too far into territories they don't understand. The design was pure nightmare fuel disguised as Saturday morning entertainment. That helmet that looked like it had been modeled after some deep-sea creature's skull, those red eyes that never blinked, the way his movements seemed too fluid and precise to be entirely human. Everything about Black Manta suggested that evolution had taken a wrong turn somewhere in the deepest parts of the ocean. For kids watching Challenge of the Superfriends, Black Manta represented a new kind of fear. He wasn't trying to take over the world or get revenge on society. Manta turned the ocean into a hunting ground. In that blank insectoid gaze, you felt how little he valued the surface dwellers, and in his blank insectoid gaze, they could see exactly what he thought surface dwellers were worth. 6. Zoltar, Battle of the Planets, 1978 to 1979. Imported from Japan and trimmed for US television, Battle of the Planets kept one thing razor sharp: Zoltar. While American censors cut out most of the violence and death from the original Gatchaman series, they couldn't edit out the cold, calculating menace that made Zoltar genuinely terrifying. Masked, elegant, and terrifyingly calm, Zoltar didn't rob banks or kidnap scientists or hold cities for ransom. He targeted cities and bases with calm, surgical brutality. That porcelain mask that revealed nothing. That flowing cape that made every movement seem like a dance. That sly, almost musical voice that made mass destruction sound like poetry. Every appearance meant sirens somewhere, and a countdown clock you could feel in your chest. What made Zoltar so unsettling wasn't just the scale of destruction he commanded. Though watching him order the annihilation of entire regions was shocking enough for Saturday morning television, it was how personally he seemed to take each victory and defeat. This wasn't some distant cosmic threat. This was someone who remembered every hero who had opposed him and planned accordingly. The androgynous design was deliberately unsettling in an era when television villains were expected to fit into clearly defined categories. Zoltar was neither fully masculine nor feminine, neither entirely human nor obviously alien. The mask made it impossible to read facial expressions, and the voice gave no clues about what might be going on behind that blank porcelain facade. For kids used to pie-fight villains who explained their schemes in detail and gave heroes multiple chances to escape, Watching G-Force scramble against someone who talked softly while ordering wide-scale destruction felt shockingly adult. Zoltar didn't waste time with elaborate death traps or gloating monologues. He simply identified threats and eliminated them with the methodical precision of someone who had turned warfare into an art form. The edited American version actually made Zoltar more frightening in some ways. By removing the explicit violence and death from the original Japanese series, the censors created a villain whose true capabilities could only be implied. Kids watching at home had to use their imaginations to fill in the gaps, and imagination is always more terrifying than anything that can be shown on screen. Zoltar proved that sometimes the most effective villains are the ones who treat heroism as a minor inconvenience rather than a serious threat. His calm confidence suggested that he had faced countless heroes before and knew exactly how each encounter would end. For young viewers, that certainty was more unsettling than any amount of ranting or raving could have been. 5. Ming the Merciless, Flash Gordon, 1979-80.
Dr. Tarkov, sacamos el material de su planeta para mis propósitos. ¿Tiene un reactor para fusión nuclear?
Filmation's Flash Gordon wasn't goofy space opera. It was pulp adventure played completely straight, and Ming the Merciless was exactly why it worked. While other animated villains of the era were softened for Saturday morning consumption, Ming remained the ice-cold center of Mongo, a tyrant who treated people as pieces on a board and moved them around with the casual cruelty of someone who had never considered that other beings might have feelings worth considering. The design was a masterpiece of imperial menace. Those severe lines, that predatory posture, the way he seemed to loom over every scene, even when he wasn't the tallest figure in the frame, everything about Ming's appearance suggested that he had been born to rule and had never encountered anything that made him question that assumption. But it was the voice that really sold the character. Deep, cultured, with the kind of precise diction that made every word sound like a royal decree, Ming spoke like someone who had never been contradicted and never expected to be. When he ordered executions or condemned entire populations to slavery, he did it with the same tone other people used to order breakfast. What made Ming truly shocking for young viewers wasn't his magical powers or his advanced technology, though both were impressive enough. It was his complete lack of any redeeming qualities. He didn't have a tragic backstory that explained his cruelty. He didn't show moments of doubt or regret. He was simply evil in its purest form, concentrated into a single figure who wielded absolute power with absolute corruption. The show didn't shy away from the implications of Ming's rule. Executions and slavery are explicitly threatened, and oppression is depicted, unusual for a Saturday morning cartoon. The suffering of Mongo's people wasn't just background detail. It was the driving force behind every story. For kids tuned in, expecting rocket ships and ray guns, finding an emperor who treated genocide as a policy decision was a shock that many never forgot. Ming's relationship with Flash Gordon was particularly unsettling because it was so personal. This wasn't some cosmic force of evil that threatened the universe in abstract terms. This was a tyrant who took personal pleasure in tormenting a specific individual, who seemed to enjoy the cat-and-mouse game more than he cared about actually winning it. The animation style reinforced Ming's menace through subtle details that accumulated over time. The way shadows fell across his face, the way other characters unconsciously stepped back when he entered a room, the way his presence seemed to drain color and warmth from every scene. All of it combined to create the impression of someone who was fundamentally wrong in ways that couldn't be easily explained or fixed. For a generation of kids who grew up with Ming the Merciless, he became the template for what true evil looked like, not ranting or raving or explaining elaborate schemes, but simply existing with the quiet confidence of someone who knew that power was the only thing that mattered, and he had more of it than anyone else in the universe. 4. Sleestak, Land of the Lost, 1974-76.
Sleestak, come on, let's get going!
If you know the hiss, you know the dread. That sound, part snake, part steam, part something that shouldn't exist, announced the arrival of television's most effective monsters. The Sleestak didn't just appear on screen. They materialized out of childhood nightmares with the slow inevitability of a fever dream. The Sleestak shuffled out of fog machines and dry ice like living fossils with a plan. Those blank silver eyes that reflected nothing, that deliberate, predatory movement, the way they seemed to appear from nowhere and everywhere at once. Everything about them screamed, ancient evil in a way that made kids instinctively reach for the nearest adult. What made the Sleestak truly terrifying wasn't their appearance, though those costumes were masterpieces of low-budget horror. It was their intelligence. These weren't mindless monsters stumbling around lost caverns. They had underground temples filled with crystal technology that hummed with alien purpose. They had their own language, their own culture, their own agenda that humans could barely comprehend. The actors inside those suits could barely see or breathe, and that limitation became the Sleestak's greatest strength. That stiffness, that slightly off-kilter movement, made them feel genuinely inhuman. They moved like creatures that had evolved in a different gravity, under different rules, with different priorities than anything terrestrial. Their underground civilization was a masterpiece of production design that suggested vast, unknowable depths beneath the familiar world. Those crystal chambers with their pulsing lights and incomprehensible machinery hinted at technology so advanced it might as well be magic, operated by beings so alien that communication was barely possible. Every kid who watched Land of the Lost learned the fundamental rule of Sleestak encounters. You can outrun one Sleestak if you're fast and lucky. You cannot outrun the echo of that hiss, which means more are coming, and they're coordinating their hunt with the patience of creatures who have been perfecting the art of predation for millions of years. The Sleestak proved that the most effective monsters are the ones that feel like they belong to a completely different story than the one you thought you were watching. They turned a family adventure show into a survival horror series with nothing more than rubber suits, dry ice, and the understanding that sometimes the most terrifying thing about a monster is the suggestion that it's smarter than you are. 3. Bigfoot, the $6 Million Man, 1976 to 77. Andre the Giant first, then Ted Cassidy. The silhouette was always the same. Barn door shoulders, tree trunk arms, and a roar that seemed to come from the earth itself. But this wasn't your grandfather's Bigfoot legend. This was something far stranger and more terrifying than any campfire story. The initial episodes played like classic monster movies. Bigfoot was the creature in the woods, the thing that left impossible footprints and threw grown men around like rag dolls. Steve Austin's bionic strength finally had a match, and watching these two titans clash in the forest was like witnessing a battle between gods. Then came the reveal that broke brains on playgrounds nationwide. Bigfoot was bionic, not just strong, artificially enhanced, not just a monster, a creation. And he wasn't working alone. He was part of an alien conspiracy that had been operating on Earth for decades, using the Bigfoot legend as cover for their activities. The shock wasn't just the science fiction twist, it was the realization that everything you thought you knew about this creature was wrong. He wasn't the last of his kind, hiding in the wilderness. He was the first of a new kind, engineered by beings with technology that made human bionics look primitive. Andre the Giant brought a tragic nobility to the role that elevated it beyond simple monster movie territory. His Bigfoot wasn't just a mindless beast, he was a being caught between worlds, neither fully human nor fully alien, struggling with programming that conflicted with something deeper and more fundamental. When Ted Cassidy took over the role, he brought a different energy, more mechanical, more obviously artificial, but also more unsettling. His Bigfoot felt like a machine, wearing the skin of a legend, and his performance suggested vast intelligence operating behind those eyes. The episodes featuring Bigfoot played like urban legends told around a campfire, except you were watching Steve Austin get thrown through actual trees by an actual giant. The forest settings, the practical effects, the way the camera captured the scale difference between normal humans and this towering figure, everything combined to create a sense of primal fear that tapped into humanity's oldest nightmares about what might be lurking in the dark places of the world. But the alien connection added a layer of cosmic horror that transformed simple monster encounters into something far more unsettling. If Bigfoot was working with aliens, if the legends were cover stories for extraterrestrial activity, then what else might be hiding behind our folklore? What other myths might be masking a far stranger reality? The Bigfoot episodes proved that the most effective monsters are the ones that start familiar and then reveal themselves to be something completely unexpected. They took a creature everyone thought they understood and transformed it into something that challenged every assumption about what was possible in the world of the $6 Million Man. 2. Fembots, the Bionic Woman, 1976 to 77.
Tammy, watch out!
When those synthetic faceplates slid off with that distinctive mechanical whir, every kid in America learned a new kind of fear. The Fembots weren't just robots. They were doppelgangers, infiltrators, the nightmare scenario of discovering that the people you trusted most might not be people at all. Dr. Franklin's Fembots looked like your neighbors, your teachers, your mother's friends from the PTA. They had perfect hair, pleasant smiles, and the kind of wholesome appearance that made them invisible in suburban America until the moment their programming kicked in and those faces literally fell away to reveal the cold, mechanical reality underneath. The genius of the Fembots wasn't their advanced technology or their combat capabilities. It was their ability to hide in plain sight, to infiltrate human society so completely that their presence went unnoticed until it was too late. They represented every paranoid fantasy about who you could really trust, wrapped in a package that looked reassuringly normal. What made them truly terrifying was the implication that Jaime Summers herself, the Bionic woman, your anchor of calm and competence in a world of increasing technological anxiety, could be replaced. If they could duplicate her, if they could fool her closest friends and allies, then who was safe? How could you tell the difference between the real person and the perfect copy? The Fembot episodes played like invasion narratives, but instead of aliens from outer space, the invaders looked exactly like us. They spoke our language, knew our customs, understood our weaknesses better than we understood them ourselves. They were the enemy within, the threat that couldn't be detected until it was ready to strike. The mechanical precision of their movements when they dropped their human disguises was choreographed to maximum unsettling effect. These weren't clumsy robots stumbling through human interactions. They were perfect mimics who had studied human behavior so thoroughly that they could replicate it flawlessly until they didn't need to anymore. The sound design was crucial to their impact. That whirring noise when their faces opened, the mechanical clicking of their internal mechanisms, the way their voices shifted from warm and human to cold and electronic, every audio cue reinforced the horror of discovering that what you thought was alive was actually an elaborate mechanical puppet. For kids watching at home, the Fembots introduced the concept of identity theft decades before the internet made it a daily concern. They proved that the most dangerous enemies weren't the ones who announced their presence with dramatic entrances and villainous speeches. They were the ones who looked so normal, so trustworthy, so much like the people you saw every day that you never suspected them until it was too late. 1. Death Probe, the $6 Million Man, 1977. No cape, no mask, no monologue explaining its evil plan. Just an unstoppable thing rolling down Main Street America, turning suburban normalcy into a war zone with the casual efficiency of a natural disaster. Death Probe wasn't a villain in any traditional sense. It was a Soviet Venus probe that had gone rogue, malfunctioning after re-entry, and saw all life as an obstacle to be eliminated. It had no personality, no motivation beyond its twisted directive, no weakness that could be exploited through clever dialogue or moral appeals. The horror was existential and grown up in a way that caught viewers completely off guard. This wasn't a masked mastermind who could be reasoned with or defeated through superior virtue. This was physics made malevolent, technology turned predator, the nightmare scenario of what happens when our tools decide they don't need us anymore. Watching Steve Austin, the $6 Million Man himself, throw his bionic punches at Death Probe was like watching someone try to fist-fight a freight train. The sparks that flew when his enhanced strength met the probe's armored hull weren't just special effects. They were visual proof that for the first time, Steve had encountered something that his bionic enhancements couldn't overcome through brute force. The probe's design was a masterpiece of utilitarian menace. No unnecessary decorations, no intimidating features added for psychological effect, just hard edges, whirring mechanisms, and the kind of purposeful movement that suggested every action was calculated for maximum efficiency. It looked exactly like what it was, a machine built to survive the harshest environment in the solar system, now repurposed for destruction. What made Death Probe truly shocking was how it moved through the world with complete indifference to human concerns. It didn't gloat over its victories or pause to savor its enemies' fear. It simply identified targets and eliminated them with the same mechanical precision it had once used to analyze Venusian soil samples. For viewers raised on villains who explained their schemes and gave heroes chances to escape, Death Probe was a revelation and a nightmare. It represented the moment when television asked the question, that would define the next decade of science fiction. What if the villain is physics? What if evil doesn't need a face or a motivation? What if the thing trying to kill you is just following its programming? The probe's relentless pursuit through suburban streets turned familiar neighborhoods into alien landscapes. Every corner could hide an ambush, every open space became a killing field, and every moment of safety was just a temporary reprieve before the whirring death machine found your trail again. From hiss to hardware, from rubber suits to robot faces, 70s TV didn't just give us villains, it gave us new kinds of fear. These weren't the mustache-twirling bad guys of earlier eras or the CGI nightmares of today. They were something uniquely of their time. Practical effects made terrifying through imagination. Limited budgets transformed into unlimited creativity. The best ones felt possible when you turned off the set. A shadow beyond the porch light that moved a little too deliberately. A hum behind the wall that sounded almost mechanical. A laugh in the hallway that seemed to echo from somewhere much deeper and darker than it should. These villains didn't need origin stories or complex motivations. They just needed to tap into the fundamental fears that every kid carries. That the adults might not be able to protect you, that the familiar world might not be as safe as it seems, and that sometimes the monsters are real, even if they're made of rubber and operated by people in uncomfortable costumes. They proved that the most effective horror doesn't come from gore or jump scares. It comes from the slow realization that the world is stranger and more dangerous than you thought, and that the line between fantasy and reality is thinner than anyone wants to admit. Which one haunted your house? Was it the mechanical whir of Fembot faces opening? The slow shuffle of Sleestak feet in underground tunnels? Ming's cold decree echoing through Mongo? Drop the name and the scene that still gives you chills. And if this trip through television's forgotten rogues gallery hit those memory centers just right, we're diving even deeper next week. Because the 70s had more than 7 villains worth remembering, and some of the ones we didn't cover today were even stranger than the ones we did. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready for more deep dives into the decade that proved you didn't need big budgets to create big scares. Just imagination, commitment, and the understanding that sometimes the best way to entertain children is to terrify them just a little bit.